Hello, hello, and welcome to Dinner and Drama, the podcast where we dish out a hot, heaping serving of drama paired with the recipe for the perfect meal. Today, we have something special for you. I'm Drew.
And I'm Kristen.
And let's dig in. Right? On the menu today, the rise and epic fall of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, which I feel like has been in the news more lately, so I'm glad. But this is basically a young woman who, over the course of 10, 15 years, had like a really cool idea and then developed something that basically never actually existed, but was able to sell it to like a slew of who's who across the world. And now it's coming to head in her trial. So this
spoiler alert.
Well, yeah, one word for it, right? So she, she used her charm, she used her charisma, and she raised, some insane amounts of money. Like over 2 rounds of funding, $700 million during the first one, $900 million, like numbers that are really sort of hard to even imagine. And she sold it to top retailers, and she sold it to, former secretaries of states, like the who's who of people. And yet none of it ever existed, right? Like that's the whole sort of crux of this whole situation. The crux of it's like she sold something that did not exist. She sold basically make-believe, which is sort of fascinating because, of course, when this all came out, it was first self-made female billionaire, really sort of like a really interesting story, another like sort of female Steve Jobs, Silicon Valley-esque. But then, of course, it all came crumbling down when it was revealed that it wasn't real. So take us through sort of just like the baseline of this.
Okay, sure. So we're talking about Elizabeth Holmes, who in 2003 was studying at Stanford University, and she decided to drop out and use her educational trust to start a company. And she had this idea to basically make a patch that you could wear on your body that would monitor your blood and your other levels and then dispense medicine as necessary, and then also have it send the data to your doctor.
So kind of like, like the diabetic patches guys, right? Like she was thinking like, you wear nowadays, you can wear this patch on your arm, sort of measures your insulin levels and sort of alerts you to that. And kind of a good idea, right? I think she got to the point where she was even she submitted a patent for it, right?
Yeah, it's a great idea, of course. But she eventually sort of moved off of that idea. I think that I think it was just too broad of an idea to necessarily get off the ground with our existing technology because there's a lot going on,
And it just seems like after reading more about her, listen, she dropped out of college, which is fine. Like a lot of successful people dropped out of college. Bill Gates dropped out of college, everybody, right? Like there's a lot of Silicon Valley sort of stories, Steve Jobs, of course. But it seems to me like, as opposed to sort of developing, a computer or being in sort of a really profound leader, starting a medical business seems like you probably need to have a little bit more knowledge, like a base knowledge line of what that is.
So she started this company called Theranos, which basically is the term therapy and diagnosis put together, which is kind of interesting because in one of these documentaries, there's this interview with this Greek guy who thought that Theranos was sort of a riff on the Greek word, I think it's thatanos, which actually means death. So
which
he didn't think it was such a great name.
For foreshadowing, basically. Exactly. And we'll get into that real quick, right?
So after the patch, though, Elizabeth invented the idea for this thing called the Nano Tainer, and it sort of looks like a Tylenol capsule. But basically what it does is it collects 1 drop of your blood or just a few drops of your blood as opposed to vials and vials of blood that you would normally give, at a blood testing center to test your, cholesterol or whatever you need tested. And this Nano Tainer was going to be fed into her testing equipment, which she invented called the Edison. And the difference between this Edison and a normal testing laboratory situation to test blood, per my husband, Tony, who's like the resident medical lab expert, is that the Edison is sort of like the size of a desktop printer, and a regular lab testing equipment for blood is the size of like an oven, like a full size stove.
Well, and like the big thing here is, of course, like yes, it's the size, but it's also like the fact that because it's smaller, you can put these things in like a CVS or like a Walgreens or like a walk-in clinic, as opposed to having to like listen when we had to take Clay into when he was little, we had to take him for blood work, right? We had to go into like a Quest diagnostic lab. They had to like draw out like, pretty big vials of blood from a screaming 6-month-old, basically soiled himself, and like we changed him in the car. It was like an epic disaster. So much so that like we have not taken him back since, even though the pediatrician has now given us like 3 prescriptions to go or 3 orders to go get blood work done. Cause again, it's a lot of blood. You have to go to a very specific place. So like, okay, good idea. Take a couple drops of blood, number one. And number two, make it like super easy by making it smaller and able to sort of go into like a CVS or Walgreens. Frankly, like, any easier would be like basically a drive-through, like put that thing in McDonald's and then test for cholesterol after you eat the meal.
At McDonald's.
Right. Like just like drive up and be like, okay, I'd like a double cheeseburger and a syphilis test. I mean, I suppose you could put it in like, is there a seafood drive-through place? I can't think of one.
Oh,
like just Red Lobster
Captain
have
D's maybe. I don't think Captain D's. I don't even know if that.
Okay, so if Red Lobster had a drive-through, they could put one of these Edison machines in the drive-through, and then you can order crabs and order crabs. You see what I did there? There you go. Anyway, okay.
I don't believe they test for crabs with blood.
So you take drops of blood.
Not that I would know from personal
Listen,
experience.
I'm not judging you. I'm not judging anybody if you've had to get syphilis tests. Listen, I don't know if you've lived life if you haven't had to get tested for like scabies. I don't know your life.
Or HPV. I mean, everyone has HPV.
And if you we talked about that last time, right? If you don't have HPV. What is HPV? Human
papillomavirus.
Okay. I was about to say like Palmolive, but I was like, that's a soap brand. Anyways, human papillomavirus, right? So HPV, HPV, if you don't have it, you gonna get it. Okay, so we digress. So you got this, she dropped out, she creates this company, great idea, super simple, small machines, blood, a little drop of blood, can obviously shake up the entire industry, shake up Quest Diagnostic. And like, this is a massive industry. Like, I didn't know, like, when you actually start looking into like how much blood work costs, the hundreds of tests that can be run, and the size of this equipment and like the specialty, like they basically have like, there's like a couple labs in the country that have like a monopoly on this thing. So of course, like this is like a big, big deal. Okay, so that's Theranos. Like that's what we got started on. And then we have Elizabeth Holmes. So like you'll hear both, right? You'll hear us talk like Theranos in the news, and then you'll hear Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes, of course, the founder. But she in herself is a little bit like, I don't want to say quirky, but like she's got some baggage, right?
She's quirky. No doubt about it. She, as a child, she says now that when she was a child, she didn't have any actual friends. Her friends were books.
Yeah, but like she's a little bit, I don't want to say it's weird because she isn't so much introverted, although now in the court case, she's like trying, like her lawyers are basically trying to position her that way. But she isn't so much like an extrovert, but she definitely was like a huge fan of all the celebrity press. I mean, this is a woman that at the height in like the 2014, 2015 timeframe was on the cover of Forbes. She was in Inc. magazine. She was in Fortune. She was, she was going on her press tour. She loved sort of being idolized. She loved being referred to as the next Steve Jobs. And I think like if she was already quirky, she got quirkier throughout the process, right? Like this is like the crazy thing she started to basically emulate Steve Jobs. Like that's the only thing we could say, right? Like she went from sort of having a normal pitched voice to starting to wear black turtlenecks with jeans. And then all of a sudden her voice
got real deep.
Like, we have a clip here and I just sort of, it's weird. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. I'm going to play it real quick. Hold on.
To eliminate the tubes and tubes of blood that traditionally have to be drawn from an arm,
I mean, that just actually sounds like it's
to eliminate
hard. I mean, I don't like that sounds hard. Like, I don't even know how to describe it.
Sounds like you need a lozenge.
Yeah, it sounds like, anyway. So okay, so she's wearing, and you could see she's wearing her black turtleneck. She's definitely starting to position herself as Steve Jobs, and she deepens her voice, which, again, like, part of me is sort of like this a little sympathetic in the sense of like she's trying to make it in a male dominated world. This is during the height of the Me Too movement, kind of. So I understand, and I want to give her a ton of credit that she felt maybe she needed to do that to become more authoritative or sound more authoritative. I did find a clip of her real voice. Let me just play that real quick.
Okay.
Question was, as a 19-year-old, how do you go about the process of convincing people that you know what you're doing? And that you can pull it off? I think the first...
That also sounds like you need a throat lozenge. All right, obviously that's not her real voice, but
I don't know that she would have raised $700 million with that voice.
What is that? It sounds like that guy. Oh, I can't remember.
It sounds like something from like Monty Python.
No, it sounds like that comedian. I can't remember the guy from the Danny DeVito twins. I can't remember what it is. Anyways, so okay, so she's just an odd character. But here's the crazy thing: you would think that the way we're describing her, right, like that deep voice, odd character, black turtlenecks, but like I also want to give her some credit because clearly she had like a really crazy charisma because she was able to basically walk in to some of the biggest retailers, some of the like who's who, the Waltons, like, the Walmart Waltons we're talking about here, right?
Yeah,
we're talking about
Rupert
like
Murdoch.
Betsy DeVos's family. We're talking about former Secretary of State George Shultz. We're talking about
Henry Kissinger.
Like, it's
Sam
just crazy,
Nunn,
right?
Bill
And like
Frist.
she's getting $700 million on an idea, which, like, listen, I got a lot of ideas. So, like, I don't,
Sure.
but I'm not like, we're here walking around thinking people are going to expect it. And here's the crazy thing for me, like, personally, I've sold a lot of shit to Walgreens. Like, I've gone to Chicago, I've gone to Deerfield, I've presented many products. Like, I couldn't even get a bottle of lotion on the shelf for a brand that had been around for like 100 years unless I physically had the juice and I physically had the label. And half the time when I had the label, they wouldn't even let me put it on the planogram, which is basically the way the shelf is laid out, unless I had a damn UPC. So I couldn't even get a bottle of lotion on the shelf without any of that stuff. And this chick walks in and manages to convince the entire executive board of Walgreens to take concept, and not only take a concept, but they committed $140 million on top of renovating the stores to accommodate this Edison machine. And the entire, like, if you look back at it, like, clearly they were doing it because they were fearful that she was going to turn around and bring this to CVS. So that's just like insane to me. $700 million. She secures some of the top retailers. I think it was Safeway and Walgreens had exclusive for these launches here.
Yes.
Walgreens with Boots Alliance, like one of the largest retailers in the world, right? Like, this is a huge, huge deal here. $700 million. And again, I just want to reiterate, like, at this point, it did not exist in this, like, in the sense of like, they had prototypes, but essentially the prototypes were like crushing the vials. They were like overheating. I saw the deposition for one of the scientists. She basically said like 1 out of every 4 tests, it was broken. And in order to calibrate the machine to rerun the test, it would take 18 hours. So people were like legit sleeping in their car to rerun that test because, here they are. They're promising these fast tests. They're promising, quick turnarounds. They were promising like absolute results. So to me, like, again, I get stuck on this idea that like she was not only able to sell this idea, but the idea didn't exist, even though it was great, and it continued to not exist, right? Like, that was the whole thing. So, okay, so you got Theranos, you got Elizabeth Holmes, and then you sort of extend this because as Theranos starts to sort of evolve and as it starts to collect all this money, she brings on essentially this guy named Sunny Balwani, who becomes the president and COO, and also her lover, as recent text messages in the court case evolved, right? Like, it was public knowledge, obviously, that they were romantically involved. But so she brings him on, and this is sort of where now all of a sudden they're like they both of them are starting to become aware that like clearly this technology is not working. And this is where you sort of start seeing more and more of like the fraud and deception happening, correct?
Right. So she's selling herself, as you said, to Forbes magazine and all these places. And she's, on the Forbes 400 of, up and coming millionaires and all that stuff. And she was actually like making some headway in getting the Theranos name out there. She, by 2015, had like tons of US patents and foreign patents. And so she wasn't like doing nothing exactly. And in that same year, the FDA approved Theranos to test for herpes outside of a clinical lab setting, which is a pretty big deal. And I did ask Tony, the resident laboratory expert, why that would be the first test, if it was like an easy test or something like that. And he said, yes, it's just a simple stain, he said.
It's a stain test?
So it's a simple stain.
Can I just like a side note, like herpes, like listen, got it. Like what you do on your side is up to you. If you just, you work the corner, that's you. That's good. That's fine. Is it like if somebody know, like, is there, like, what is the prevalence of like herpes tests going on? Like, and herpes, we're talking about like the downstairs herpes. We're not talking about like the upstairs herpes, right?
I assume the downstairs.
That's a difference.
Because like a lot of people, many people have
almost
the
everybody has the upstairs herpes.
Well, I don't, but maybe you do.
How do you know you don't have the herpes?
I know.
I mean, I don't have like lip herpes. Or
no, I don't have that either.
I don't know. I don't think I have it. Clearly,
I don't think I have it.
I don't think I have it. Tony probably has it. He's from England, so
For sure.
That's just not his fault. That's the medical system over there. Speaking of which, I mean, anyways, like if you know how many herpes tests are run in the United States, just let me know. Like I'm guessing we are top leaders in the world. I don't know. I'm guessing we number one. I don't know. I don't.
But along with all these patents, let me get us back on track here.
You don't want to keep talking about herpes? There also
was.
They ran syphilis tests too. That was another one. Anyway, keep going.
Yes, we'll get to that. So along with all these patents and this herpes test approval, there also started to be rumblings out there in the industry that, Theranos was, not publishing any peer-reviewed material. Their claims were exaggerated.
Because it didn't work.
The biggest one is that, I'm sorry,
because it didn't work.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the biggest thing is that
it doesn't work.
These tests were not actually being run on their Edison equipment. They were being run on traditional lab equipment.
Yeah, this is when they're already launched, right? Like they're launched already. They're running tests for people. But what they're not disclosing, of course, and this is what we obviously, we discovered after, you research it, is like they were running the tests, but the bulk of those tests. So like that, let's go back to it. Like the claim that they were making, or that the supposed claim that they were making, or they were alluding to, was that the Edison machine was capable of running over 250 tests. What actually came to light was that, and I've heard conflicting information, let's see if it comes out in court, but that the actual machine that they developed, again, the machine was the collection method, and the actual machine itself was what were the breakthroughs. That was where the money was coming from, right? Right. But what actually turned out is that machine was only capable of running about 8 to 13 tests, and every other test that they were actually providing results on were being run on outside machines. Now, that doesn't sound terrible, except you have to remember there's a little caveat here. They were being run on like existing third-party machines, but because the sample size was a droplet of blood or a few drops of blood, as opposed to the vials of blood that are traditionally used for that machine, they essentially had to hack the machine. And essentially they had to dilute every single sample. And by diluting that sample, the percentage of error basically dramatically increases, right? So earlier we talked about like 1 in 4 was failing. That was on their machine. Imagine now taking a machine that was designed to use a larger sample size and now only giving a diluted droplet of blood. And that's after they were running some of that droplet on the 8 to 13 tests at the Edison.
Right.
So it's like it was neither cheaper, it was neither faster, and it certainly was not more accurate because they were not. I mean, and here's the thing. If they were able to just develop a method of running on the existing machines using less blood, that would have been a breakthrough in itself.
Right.
But they like went beyond that and were like, oh, no, we can use less blood and we can use our machine. And it's interesting because like in future interviews, you can hear her talking about this. And she's like, well, we didn't say that. And it's like, you did, but okay.
She's backpedaling all over the place.
Okay.
But we were talking about 2015 when all this stuff started coming out. So around the same time, George Shultz's, who was the former Secretary of State, his grandson, Tyler, went to work for Theranos. And he was, no idiot. He was a Stanford grad and he studied biology. So he actually did have some scientific background. And he only worked there for 4 months. And the reason he left is because he had growing concerns over the technology and the fact that they were in the practice of like tossing out research results that didn't fit their narrative.
Which obviously is like a no-no, right? Like we don't do that in science, apparently.
Yep. And he actually told the story I read about how a bunch of them tested themselves for syphilis on the Theranos equipment, and like 20 of them came up positive.
Which, like,
and
I'm sure some of them may have been, but like 20, that seems like a higher ratio than average. Unless, I don't know, those science people, they get a little freaky. I don't know. I feel like a lot of the people,
science nerds,
those little science nerds, you never know. I don't know. Okay.
So Tyler did email Elizabeth to say like, hey, I have these concerns. And she basically just passed the email on to Sonny, her little henchman. And he blasted him back in an email saying that he was like a mathematical idiot and like, what are you doing here? You don't know what you're talking about.
So it's weird because then he's like, nah, I'm out. And he like basically leaves. And now all of a sudden, like his personal family is like putting a mortgage on their house to pay for these legal fees
their house,
of the company who his grandfather is sitting on the board of, who doesn't believe this kid who's saying, like, no, like they don't have what you think you have. You're being swindled. Which is just crazy to me because again, you got to remember something. They've raised $700 million and then they ran out of money. And then they basically lied and went to market. They launched this thing. One of the things we got to remember is this machine actually made it into physical doors. And I believe Arizona and I think somewhere in California, but I know Arizona for a fact that they actually had stores. And the only reason I know is because later on when Walgreens dissolved the partnership after obviously all this thing came to light, they basically had to invalidate over 1 million blood test results. Like that's just to me crazy. So they're running out of money. They still have a machine that doesn't work, and they basically launch. And the reason why they launched is because in order to get more money in the sum upwards of like $900 million, they basically go to everybody and like, see, you didn't believe us, but like clearly what we have is real. We're even launched at Walgreens, which again, going back to our original conversation, it's already crazy to think that they were able to launch something that did not exist. It's already crazy to me that they were able to get $700 million for an idea that doesn't exist. And now she got $900 million and it still doesn't exist. Like
they're like, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Like
He's
I'm just
not
like,
doing anything.
Maybe she was. I don't like. Did she have like hypnotic nipples or something? I just don't know what. I just don't know what to think.
You don't really come across hypnotic nipples that often.
I mean,
so maybe,
but they could.
They're mesmerizing.
Mesmerizing nipples. I don't know. I just think it's weird. I get it. She's charismatic. Maybe it's the deep voice. Maybe it was that other voice that we were talking about.
Maybe.
I mean, I think there was like, listen, it's cool. She's this new thing in Silicon Valley. It's up and coming. At the time, like everybody wanted to get into it. Everybody was making money. The idea is cool. I could believe the stretch to 700 million. But when you launch, like we're not talking about like launching like a cell phone. We're not talking like we're talking about things that require medical clearance, FDA clearance. Like it had to go through CVS. It had to go to FDA. It had to go through a Securities Exchange. Like it had to go through all these things. And
things that could give you a diagnosis that could change your life. It can make you think you're dying when you're not dying, or the reverse.
What ended up happening, right? Like there was stories from actual like people who got test results. There's two. So
sure.
In the court case that's going on right now, some of the most damning things that I think are going to happen are they have 8 actual, like I'll call them like patients, right? They have 8 patients that are on the basically on the district attorney's list of, or the government's list of testimonies, witnesses. This woman who testified this week was a woman who had miscarried 3 times, and she basically, and every time she got pregnant again, and she had already had 2 blood tests from Quest Diagnostics that basically said the pregnancy was viable, everything was going well. And then the doctor ordered another one, and she's thinking, oh, this is fantastic. And I found out later, but that doctor's office or that practice apparently had a relationship with Theranos where they agreed to sort of run these with Theranos to help the whole like in-use trial kind of thing. Again, not trial in the sense of like it wasn't being proven. This was already launched. But she goes into a Walgreens and gets this blood test done. And the blood test comes back where, again, a certain level was low, which was indicative that the pregnancy had failed. And basically she had miscarried. They measured that she was basically had miscarried. And then she goes into the doctor's office, and the doctor basically says, would you like us to terminate the pregnancy right now? And the patient, this is the crazy thing, the patient goes, can we do another blood test just to make sure? So she goes to Quest Diagnostic. The results come back, and it's completely different from the Theranos test that she took, and shows that the pregnancy is completely fine. And by the way, she ends up going on to deliver this healthy child. So this is a woman who's miscarried 3 times, and this damn test comes back, and there's a split moment there where she could have terminated a healthy, wanted pregnancy. And I think that's just like, that's disgusting. That's the crazy part, right? Like, that's why we're talking about the trial here. And what's interesting for me is that this is something that started, the company started back like 2008, I think. What was the year that they started?
2003 initially.
2003 initially.
They started really
2008, like they started like going into things, and then 2013. And then the Wall Street Journal article was published in 2015, and like shit started to crumble from there, right?
Oh yeah, immediately after that, pretty much.
So this has been like ongoing for a long time. And again, it's crazy, 2018. But like, when did the company actually dissolve?
So, well, before it dissolved, they got a couple of little warning letters and bans. The Center for Medicaid and Medicare gave Elizabeth a 2-year ban on, am I lying? 2-year ban on owning or operating a clinical lab. And she appealed, but later that year, the ban became official. And that same year, Walgreens ended their partnership with her. And then that same year, the FDA ordered Theranos to stop using that Nano Tainer, that little blood collection device. They started paying out money in 2017, a bunch of class action lawsuits, an FBI investigation. The state of Arizona issued a suit against them, and they got a settlement of like $4.5 million. But so in 2018,
$700 million in founding and funding one, and $900 million in funding two. Conducted over 1 million tests just with Walgreens that had to be recalled. Arizona goes $4 million. That seems about right. Like, I know something like this. This is what I like.
Well, that's just the state. Also, it wasn't actual people.
I know it's just
it wasn't like victims on specific cases, that's all still to come.
So the criminal case is obviously happening right now, right? She's facing up to 20 years in prison. So 2018 happens. Now all of a sudden, like, SEC filed charges against both Sunny and Elizabeth. They settle that case, which again it's just odd to me, right? But now all of a sudden, like, they're settling the case based on like lying about revenue and defrauding investors. But now there's like a criminal case because essentially, like, they didn't lie just about taking away money from individuals for an item or a product that did not exist. They also basically were criminally negligent because they knew their device didn't work, and they were out in the market actively doing tests.
That's when they dissolved Theranos, after they got a $500,000 fine. Elizabeth was banned from, sitting on a board or holding any type of officer position for 10 years.
But like, what company is she going to run? Like,
She's going to run something in prison, I bet.
She's going to run the prison. She's going to run blood tests in the prison. You know where they really need some blood tests for syphilis and crabs? In prison. Yeah. So maybe she'll finally actually develop this thing. Like, she'll like just, hot glue some trays. Listen, there's a guy on TikTok that comes up on my newsfeed. I don't understand sometimes the For You page. It like scares me a little bit. For anybody who's not on TikTok, the For You page is basically like your newsfeed, and it's supposedly like really curated to you. Anyways, I get prison talk. And it's this guy who basically shows you, I wonder why. It's this guy who shows you how to like make things in prison. So like, it's always like, it's food recipes. So perfect for this, right? It's like how to make mac and cheese in prison, how to make, but it's like really odd stuff. Like it's like prison, risotto. And you're like, well, why do you need risotto in prison? But like, that's just a separate story. Anyways, this is a person who went from dropping out of Stanford, which let's be clear here. It's like, whether she was privileged or not, she used to trust, right? So I'm going to just use the word that like, she was not exactly like, she wasn't roughing it, let's call it, right? She used to trust to start Theranos. So here's a woman who was in Stanford, used to trust, like had at one point was worth $9 billion, $10 billion, first self-made million baronet, and now she's facing like 20 years in prison. Yeah. I mean, maybe she'll make. She's
going to be wearing maxi pads on her feet to take a shower.
She's going to use maxi pads on her feet. Oh, and here's the thing. Okay, so skimming forward, right? 2018, things like she gets the criminal indictment, and the crazy part about this is it gets delayed and delayed and delayed, and so that's like what we're talking about. It's like we're talking about this in 2021, something that basically started in 2015. You really think about the house crumbling. So it's been a little odd, and I think it's getting a lot more news now. I think a lot of people like sort of heard about this back because there was like a 2020 there was 60 Minutes, like it was all over the place.
Podcasts,
like everything. Now here's the crazy thing. Like let's skip to present day. So the trial's begun, but in the midst of her getting a criminal indictment, which means like she knew at that point what she was charged for. She knew what the potential consequences were going to be, and what does she do?
She gets knocked up.
I wonder if she did a blood test if she got knocked up. I don't know. That's just crazy to me. Like if you're facing 20 years in prison, like on your decision list or on your bucket list probably shouldn't be popping out a child. But now I'm hearing, obviously, like, of course, the biggest common thing was like, did she do it to drum up some sympathy? Which, by the way, for those who are wondering, the child is not Sunny Balwani, because skip forward, she is now in her defense basically saying that she knew nothing about this. She was completely innocent, and she made decisions that were not ethical or not to her standard because she was under duress from Balwani, who she and her defense team are claiming was basically abusive.
Yeah, he rendered her incapable of making any decisions. That's why she wore the black turtlenecks every day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why she went on a press tour. Like, this is going to be a hard defense for her. Okay, so everybody wants to know, who's the baby daddy?
So the baby daddy is a guy named Billy Evans, who's a hotel heir. He's 10 years younger than she is. He's worth $135 million. So, I mean, if she goes to jail, he can just buy the kid a new mama.
But, like, okay, like, I'm going to go back to hypnotic nipples. Like, I know that, like because $700 million. She gets money from Walgreens. She gets money from the Walmart.
He meets her when she's already in deep doo-doo.
And then she gets criminally indicted. Like, she marries him in 2019. This guy who's worth $135 million already knows that this woman is about to face a trial that has a sentence potential of 20 years. So yeah, she's trying to pin it under Balwani, throw him out under the bus. She, again, hypnotic nipples her way into marrying this guy named Billy Evans, who's worth $135 million.
Burning Man. They fell in love at Burning Man. You can't deny that love.
Again, like, I'm going to skip forward. Like, so you are about to face a trial for $20 million for 20 years, or 20 years after swindling people out of like $1.6 billion. And you're like, what should we do this weekend? Let's go to Burning Man. Like,
well, she also has to pay restitution, so she's going to burn through that.
She has to pay prostitution.
$35 million pretty quick.
You said prostitution?
Restitution.
Is that what she was doing at Burning Man? Prostitution?
She was drumming up some.
Okay, so like, I don't know. So she's facing 20 years. The case is on, like, I think this is week 3 of the court proceedings. Obviously, it's going to be a very long court proceeding. Sunny Balwani's case is not even starting until 2022, which is really intriguing because, of course, his lawyers are asking the judge for like okay, so apparently this case is so hot that it's standing room only in the courtroom. And Sunny Balwani's
has groupies.
Lawyer, the groupies. Sunny Balwani's lawyers are like, hey, judge, we need 2 permanent seats so that we can attend the trial to figure out what we're going to do in our case. And the judge is like, yeah, no, you can like just stand in line.
Wait in line.
Like, be here
like
every morning,
else.
right? Which I just, like, that's a little side note, but like, I just think that's really funny. Like the judge is like, no, like, no,
Sorry.
you can just come in. I have a reserved seat and like she has a reserved seat. And that's the reserved seat here, right? But apparently getting in is like harder than getting Hamilton tickets at this point. Which, you know, okay, fine. So Sonny's trial starts in 2022. I don't know what his defense is going to be. Obviously, he's gonna have to address the fact that, like, you know, I don't know what his defense is going to be. That's
maybe
gonna be
the hypnotic nipples will be his defense.
Hypnotic nipple. Again, like, okay, so she's throwing him under the bus, but like, can she really, like, how does he throw her under the bus if she also gets convicted? I guess it depends on if she gets convicted. I don't know. I think these testimonies are going to be really interesting. And of course, the big conversation right now is like whether or not she is going to testify. And there's a lot of indication that says that she will. Even here, right? Like there was a lot of talk about why she didn't take a plea deal. And I, you know, listen, for all of her flaws, she clearly is super charismatic. And like at the end of the day, she was a big risk taker. She clearly took a ton of risk in doing what she clearly took a ton of risk because she was basically selling something that didn't exist. And I think she's rolling her dice right now to go to court again. I don't know.
So what should we make with this drama? What kind of meals should we make?
So I think, and you think, we talked about this, right? So we're proposing a blood orange souffle, right? Because you know, if anybody who's made a souffle, I don't know if anybody knows this, but Kristen here has a culinary degree. So tell us why souffles are difficult, in particular, what they tend to do if you make too much noise or if you move them too much?
Yeah, they're very, very sensitive. So they start with egg whites. So you just got to whip the bejesus out of these egg whites, but then you need to folding in whatever your flavor is. But you got to fold.
Side note, sorry, you cannot use the word fold in and not bring up Schitt's Creek. Guys, if you haven't watched Schitt's Creek, there's Google Schitt's Creek fold in the cheese on YouTube, because Moira, who's the mom character on Schitt's Creek, is reading recipe directions to her son, David. And she's like, fold in the cheese. And he's like, I don't know what that means. And she's like, I could not be clearer, David. Fold in the cheese. Like, if you say the word one more freaking time, she goes, I cannot be clearer. Fold in the cheese. Folding in. Tell us, please, what folding in means.
So you have to incorporate whatever your flavor is.
I don't think that word helps, though. Just like, can you give us a visual reference?
So you have to mix it in slowly because you don't want to deflate these egg whites that are puffed up to.
So like a gentle stirring.
Yes, gentle stirring. And then you have to get them in the oven and they will rise up. So if you put them in a little ramekin, it will rise up above the ramekin. But the interesting thing, when I was working on this recipe, I was juicing these blood oranges and they were slightly bigger than the contraption I have to get the juice out. So blood orange juice was literally like shooting out of every side of all over my cabinets.
Again, the irony here, right?
Doors.
Because like the original Edison machines were like shooting out blood and glass because they were crushing each other.
We came
right?
full circle.
So listen, guys,
Yeah.
Blood orange souffle, perfect recipe for this like dramatic, long strung out thing, right? Because you got the blood orange, of course, and then you have the souffle, which has a dramatic rise. But the problem with souffles, and if you make this recipe, of course, maybe like you can give us some tips here. But like, of course, the big issue with souffles is that they deflate
and fall and fit.
Yeah. And that's kind of like, I mean, I don't know, like this is a great metaphor for what we just talked about, right? Like you have this like rising star. in the blood field, and it could have been such a great thing. I'll be following the court case, I think, just because I think it's going to be interesting to see what comes out. Anyways, this has been a interesting drama, and I think it's going to continue to play out. Maybe we'll do an episode 2 once the court cases come out a little bit. We'll do a recap or something like that. But it has been a pleasure. If you're listening to our podcast, if you're watching on YouTube, definitely subscribe below. And we hope you enjoyed both this episode and enjoyed the blood orange souffle. The recipe will be linked below, so please enjoy that. And with that, I bid you adieu. Thanks. This is Drew again with Dinner and Drama.
And this is Kristen.